Hi, welcome to this episode of Patient Education for the Educated Patient. Today we're going to talk about what happens when you get to the second stage of labor, meaning you're 10 centimeters dilated, but you can't deliver the baby without help from your doctor. And help can come in the form of three ways. Number one, a C-section. Number two, a vacuum-assisted vaginal delivery. And number three, a forceps-assisted vaginal delivery. This is a highly requested video on a very complicated subject. So I'm going to try to break this down into three parts, kind of like a beginner, intermediate, and expert kind of video lecture series. So the reason we're bringing this up is because it's probably the most important part of your birth plan, but it's never addressed in anyone's birth plan. I've been doing this for several years and I've gotten hundreds of birth plans, if not thousands. I've seen every template, format, checklist that people find on the internet, but none of them address what to do if you get stuck in the second stage of labor. So that's what we're going to try to tackle here. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. But the goal here is to give you a little bit of knowledge to build a foundation so that you can make the educated decision when it comes to you and your baby if you find yourselves stuck in this exact scenario. Take-home points for part one will be that 1 out of 5 women are going to need help in the second stage of labor. This mostly applies to people who are full-term, one baby, first-time moms, and the baby's in a head-down position, which we'll get into. But in general, if this is your first delivery, then you're most likely one of these women and your odds of getting stuck in the second stage of labor are about 20%. So let's start with the definitions. There's 3 stages of labor, not to be confused with the 3 trimesters of pregnancy. So the first stage of labor is from the onset of labor, from the beginning until you're 10 centimeters dilated, meaning your cervix is now dilated to 10 centimeters. That's the most your cervix is going to dilate. Now, the second stage of labor is when your cervix is completely dilated at about 10 centimeters until the baby is delivered. So that accomplishes the second stage of labor. The third stage of labor is from delivery of the baby until delivery of the placenta. So what we're going to focus on here is the second stage of labor when it doesn't go according to plan. That means you got to 10 centimeters of cervical dilation, but for any number of reasons, you couldn't push the baby out and needed help from your doctor to deliver that baby safely. So there's a million different names this can be labeled as, and there's a number of different reasons this can happen for, but ultimately, maybe you're exhausted, maybe the birth canal's small, the baby's big, the contractions aren't very powerful, or that the baby simply is not tolerating the stress of being pushed out through the birth canal for one reason or another. Maybe it's the umbilical cord, maybe it's the placenta, maybe it's a combination of factors. But for one reason or another, you just couldn't deliver the baby safely without help from your doctor. You don't want to have the attitude of, it won't be me. And we'll talk about that because 20% of patients are going to find themselves in this exact situation. The much healthier way to go about this is to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And I have a feeling that because you're watching this video, that's exactly what you're doing. You don't want to be caught off guard. And that's why I made this video. I want to give you some sort of introduction to this scenario so that when you are talking with your doctor to figure out the best thing for you and your baby, you have something to go on. You won't be completely in the dark. There are a number of different articles that support about a 20% figure when it comes to how many people are going to need help in the second stage of labor to deliver their baby. So I chose this article for several reasons. There's several articles that can support the figure of about 20% of patients needing help delivering their baby in the second stage. But I chose this one for a few reasons. Number one, it's sponsored by the National Institute of Health. Therefore, it is available publicly. You just need internet access. You don't have to have a subscription to the journal itself. Number two, This data was gathered across, I think, 14 different labor and delivery units across the country. So that incorporates the obstetrical practices of several different parts of the country and several hundred different obstetricians, which makes it a little bit more generalizable and applicable to your situation. And then number 3, this data was gathered looking at fetal pulse oximeters. And so they weren't looking at how many people got stuck in the second stage of labor, which decreases the observational bias. And that makes it more accurate. When you're not actually studying how many people get stuck in the second stage of labor, you actually get a better and more accurate result of who does get stuck in the second stage of labor. So this data set, kind of like we talked about at the beginning, had 5,341 pregnant moms. These were first-time moms. These were pregnancies at 36 plus weeks. All the babies were in a head-down position, and there was only one baby, no twins or triplets or high-order pregnancies. So out of these 5,300 women, 1,215 delivered by C-section in the first stage of labor. That's about 23% of these patients. So you have to remember that if something goes wrong or not according to plan before you get to 10 centimeters of dilation, you only have one option. You have to have a C-section. The vacuum-assisted vaginal delivery and the forceps-assisted vaginal delivery, those options are only available to you if you get to the second stage of labor. So in this study, about 4,100 patients made it to the second stage of labor. And out of these 4,100 patients, 3,000 delivered vaginally, and that's according to plan. They went into labor, got through the first stage, got into the second stage, pushed, and delivered a baby. So that happens about 57% of the time. That leaves about 1,100 patients, or about 20% of patients, who got to 10 centimeters of dilation, but for one reason or another, needed help delivering their baby. In this study in particular, this group was then divided into about 30-70. 30% of patients got a C-section and about 70% of patients were able to deliver vaginally, but they needed help with either forceps or a vacuum device to help deliver the baby. So that's kind of the key message here, that 23% of patients are going to start labor but wind up with a C-section because they never made it to the second stage of labor. Then about 57% of patients are going to deliver the baby vaginally with no help. And that's, according to plan. That's the ideal scenario. And then the big take-home point, like we said, 20% of patients are going to find themselves stuck in the second stage of labor. And so that's, again, the take-home point. 1 out of 5 women, it's very common, are going to find themselves stuck in the second stage of labor and needing help from their obstetrician to safely deliver the baby. But remember, this is first-time moms, 36 weeks pregnant, head down, and singleton pregnancies. So if you've had a previous vaginal delivery, your chance of getting stuck in the second stage is much, much lower. If you've had a previous C-section, well, your chance of getting stuck in the second stage is much higher. So you do have to factor that into your own individual situation, because it's generalizable, yes, but you have to adjust it for your unique risk factors. So that concludes the first part of this series, talking about the failed second stage of labor. If I haven't lost you yet, then watch the second part and hopefully you get a little bit more information out of that. Until then, stay healthy and stay educated. Thank you for watching this episode of Patient Education for the Educated Patient. I hope you found this content both helpful and meaningful, and that you'll be able to use it to live a healthier life. If there's any questions, please leave them in the comments section below. I do welcome feedback, so please also leave me any comments or suggestions in the comments section. Please subscribe and turn on the notifications, and I hope to see you at the next episode. Until then, stay healthy and stay educated.